Welcome back to the Open Up podcast, everyone, into episode 57 with Kat Houareau.
Yes, that's
Yes.
right.
Okay, we were speaking about it beforehand about the sort of organisations you're an ambassador for and what you do. There's too many for me to list. Can you please fill everyone in?
Please share. Sure. Well, I'm a Lifeline WA ambassador as someone that's actually not only been bereaved but survived multiple attempts over a 30-year period. And I no longer see suicide as a coping mechanism anymore, which is fantastic. I'm also an ambassador for Wellness for Women, which is around women's experiences. And I've just been made a media advocate, which is part of a national program called Voices for Change.
Yep.
And that's run by Our Watch. And I chair a suicide prevention network. As you know, I've got my own radio show, which is a lived experience show called Road to Recovery. And I also co-host a show with Matt Patrick from Strong Minds on Noongar Radio as well.
That's cool.
So, yeah.
And, what channel is that Road to Recovery on?
Road to Recovery is on 89.7 FM. And it's every Friday, 12 till 2, and it's also on podcast as well. And it goes across all of WA. And my understanding is the station manager is actually trying to get it so it goes nationally across all the community radio stations, which is fantastic. Yes, I think that's awesome.
And with what you've been through, what we were talking about beforehand, and what you're doing now, I feel like you deserve it.
Oh, thank you. Well, yeah. Well, as I, said to you when we were talking off air before, that my journey in life, I've overcome many challenges, and they started pretty much from the age of 5 up to the age of 40. So, when I talk about recovery, I really do know my stuff and that road to recovery. And I think, like for myself, I've experienced incest, domestic violence, poverty, homelessness as a youth, sexual traumas, everything. So, yeah, and it can go on, and I can unpack that if you want, and I'm quite happy to.
Yeah, if you're okay walking us through your story, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, sure. So, my first experience around, the incest and the sexual abuse is when I was like about 5 years of age. And, and it continued, unfortunately, was with my stepfather and my uncle and several of his friends. And it wasn't until I had that real awareness of actually what was going on. I was probably about 12. And at that time, my mother had split from her husband, and I came to the realisation of what was going on. And I started to articulate it, and I had bottled it up and hid it in myself, which is what a lot of people do. They block it because they don't want to share, and it's too painful. So I started to articulate it, and as a teenager, you're coming out through your own sexuality and understanding who you are, and attracted to boys and girls and all that sort of stuff as you do. And it was just I was quite frightened of the intimacy, and then all of a sudden it was like a massive floodgate. It just came back to me. It really hit me, and I spoke up about it. And I was with a friend from high school, and we had a girls' sleepover, and I shared what had happened. And it was really sad because when I said it as a protection mechanism, I was like, I'm not telling you what happened. It didn't happen if you say anything to anybody, because I was so frightened that people would judge me and share my story, and I'd be shamed. So, through that experience and observing family domestic violence and incest and all that sort of stuff, and not really understanding, and having a belief that that was very normal when it wasn't very normal at all in the real world. So, I continued on. I had my first attempt at suicide, and if it does trigger anyone, please reach out to support. It's really important. Check in with your GP or Lifeline on 13 11 14, 24/7. But I think it's important for people to understand that, because sharing your story and allowing that vulnerability can be quite frightening at times. And so, my whole life sort of, from my experience, it sort of led to me to have a trajectory of where I was actually going. And unfortunately, that trajectory, without no coping mechanisms which were positive and healthy, actually led to me to attempting my first suicide at 19, and then later at 28, and then later, at 39 and then 40. And, the sexual traumas stopped when I was 23. I was assaulted by a landlord after my ex-husband had tried to kill me. He was in the military. So I just said, no more. No
Wow.
more. No one's going to touch me. No one's going to like physically assault me. No one's going to sexually assault me or anything like that. I was taking back my power and started to have a voice and wanted to take control. But, I think, even at the age of 15 when I was homeless, I was actually reading Dale Carnegie books. I was reading books about trauma. I was reading books about incest. I was reading, so many books. The first book I read was by Dr. David Burns, Feeling Good, which is around cognitive behaviour therapy. And I still have that book to today. And
Wow.
they've lent that book to so many people to read, to learn those tools. And obviously from now on, we've actually got other therapies that are around, like, dialectical behaviour therapy, emotional regulation. But, I remember sitting in the psych ward in Royal Perth Hospital back then and watching people talking to spoons, and people had really severe psychosis. And I remember talking to a girl who had attempted to take her own life from seeing her partner take his own life. And, she told me what had happened, and then she self-harmed. And we had this really, really open discussion around how we felt, and really felt validated and heard just by talking to ourselves. Because back then, clinicians and the medical model would, I was threatened with going to Greylands Hospital and being locked up and incarcerated indefinitely if I
Wow.
decided to take my life, and if I decided to run away. And that's not helping people recover. That doesn't help people to move forward. And sort of, I'd recognised in my own family that there were issues. And, I told my father, who I had an estranged relationship with, as a result of my mother saying that he was deceased because of her own traumas and undealt issues. And so I could see patterns and things not adding up, and I was questioning things and asking why. And, back then in those days, it was like children should be seen and not heard, which is not correct.
Yeah.
And so, so I kept asking the questions, why this, what's happening? And I remember, I think, when I came back from travelling, I left the country as a result of the domestic violence experience because I was fearful for my life for a couple of years. And I came back and I continued doing the work even when I lived in Japan and I was traveling through Asia. I learnt Reiki, I learnt reflexology. So we're talking in the early 1990s, okay, where that sort of stuff was all out there. You've got to be a hippie. And I was seeking at a very young age to understand the experiences that had occurred in my life, but also the bigger picture of what happened to these people. And it wasn't about blame. It wasn't about being angry, because, anger is that real deep emotional subset of feelings that we can actually focus on.
Yeah.
So I knew something didn't add up. I continued to sort of work on myself constantly. I had a really good opportunity. I was working for a magazine in the health industry, and it was around the alternative space when you probably, I don't know, you might not recall, but they used to be called the Orange People and the Rajneesh. Do you know
No.
those guys? Okay, see what I mean? So that was around like the Bhagwan, okay? If you look up the Orange People, you would now know him as the Osho. So they had, it was, people saw it as the cult, okay? He was interviewed on 60 Minutes and this, that, the other, and his colleague, Sheila, they had an office here in Fremantle in Perth. And so I was working for a magazine that was part of that cult
Wow.
per se, but it wasn't a cult. What it was actually, um, socially, they were far, looking at the humanity side of growth and things. They were so progressive that anything that's progressive or forward thinking or thinks outside the square is a threat to our current society. So they got labelled as being a cult, and, there was orgies going on and they were stealing people's money and all that. It wasn't that at all, at all. And so I started working with these guys, and I learned about mindfulness back then, meditation. I did birthing and regression work.
Damn,
Uh,
that's early.
yeah, I was so honoured and gifted to meet Sondra Ray, Louise Hay,
Wow.
Wayne Dyer, Deepak Chopra. Who else did I meet? Stuart Wilde. and he was talking about the whole money matters things. I did work with him. I also did work with Annie Sprinkle, and she was a very famous porn star and movie, in the sex industry, that sort of stuff. And she was very innovative, and she's a global sexologist now, eco-sexologist. So she's done a lot of work in that space, and she's still around. So I was so blessed and touched. And even though my experiences were really hard, I grew from those experiences and doing those workshops, and I put myself out there and actually grew from it. So there's some of the things that I did. But as I sort of said to you off air, after my final attempt when I was 40, I was like, what's going on here? Let's unravel it all. And, I was given a gift. And I do say that because it was about my family history, and it went back from 1942 to 1989 on the history of my mother and her siblings all being literally, I sort of see it as being incarcerated because the care that they were given was atrocious. So they were put as wards of the state until the age of 18. And I read through this document, and as I showed you before, it was pretty thick like
Yes.
that. And it made me realise the pain and the suffering and the emotional challenges they had experienced, and not knowing anything outside that circle of what they knew. No circle of influence that had a positive impact on them. No one to positively role modelling, even the language as well through this document. And I can sort of sit back and reflect with my younger siblings, just some of the language and the dialect that my mother actually said to them. And even with myself, it was very disempowering. It wasn't encouraging. It didn't validate the experience. And I know where that came from. But as I said, because I have started writing a book about my journey.
Yes.
And I've been told that I will be threatened and sued by family members who weren't even born yet if I had opened up this Pandora's box, which is really quite sad. But the reality of growth and change and flourishing is about sharing your story and not living in shame. And it's really sad because to this date, they all believe that what I'm talking about is garbage. When I've got a
Really?
legal document here, yeah, and it's really sad because it just goes to show me how much they are entrenched in shame
Mm-hmm.
and the emotional pain and the depth of those experiences that they incurred during that time frame and even over their life themselves. So, I come out and I talk about it, as you know, and I think it's really important. But I think, when we talk about change and growth, I think, becoming an intentional learner is really important. And when I talk about that, that's something for myself that I actually did when I was 15. I was out there reading all these books and they're going, what are you doing? It was like, how to win friends and influence people. I was reading books about money and and it just sort of flowed. And I think, growth just doesn't happen. There's so many things out there for us as an individual and human beings that are free. Okay. And, obviously we've got the Google, but we've got the libraries, there's books, encyclopedias. There's so much context for us to actually access, which is free. So I think that's one of the biggest things. I think also sort of developing your own self-awareness. You've got to know yourself in order to grow. Okay. And getting curious about
100%.
what's going on. Yeah. Yeah. And you probably can relate to what I'm talking about. And I think, some of the other points around that growth of changing and learning to be a leader for yourself, but learning to be a leader for others, I think is also believing in yourself. You must see the value of who you are and what you can offer others. Okay, because all our experiences are gold. And you have to add value to yourself because no one else is going to do it for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
that's
and
powerful.
yeah, totally. And I think the other thing is that as individuals and as human beings, one of the biggest things that we don't do is actually taking the time to reflect. Okay. Because we are living in a society where it's go, 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 and people are not taking that time to reflect. One of the biggest things and the joys that I love doing is I go offline, I go bush, and you won't hear from me because you know why? Where I go is I don't have access to the internet. The phone doesn't work, and I find myself very grounded in the bush or, by a river. And I think that just sort of gives you the time to actually pause and stop and catch up with yourself, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
because, does that make
Yeah,
sense?
especially with Instagram and Facebook, constant comparison. If you're always
Totally.
comparing, you're never going to be happy with who you are.
Yeah, and it's not healthy because that creates a level of narcissism,
Yeah.
that comparing and valuing yourself and stuff like that. But I also think the other thing which I find to actually succeed and to grow and to change, right, is probably embracing discipline daily. Okay. And
Yeah.
one of the biggest things I learned for me was, right, when I was all over the place and I was unwell, I had no routine. Okay. And for years now, I commit to a routine. I wake up at 4:30 in the morning and people go, oh my God, like, why are you getting up so early? You know what? I wake up at 4:30, I do my meditation, I go for a walk, I have my juice, okay? I set my day. And the biggest thing that I don't do is I don't get on my emails and respond to my email straight away.
Yeah.
And people go, why not? And I go, you know what? Because when you get attached to the computer and you're sitting there, the emails you get bogged down with. Okay. You're better off making phone calls and connecting with people that you need to get done, that are going to help you accomplish things. I set my emails and responding to emails at about 11 o'clock in the morning. And
Good.
people go, and that's something that I do routinely. It's like, I don't care. It's just something that I practice and it works. So that's a really good tip. Don't look at your emails or the internet. Make your phone calls with the people that are going to help you achieve anything that you've got to do with your projects and stuff. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, like with, I think Cal Newport did a book called Deep Work, and he talks about the effects of distraction, especially with social media and emails, and it having like a
yep,
30-minute residual effect, so you can't focus for the next 30 minutes.
yep.
So if you're doing that first thing in the morning, you better, get ready to spend the next half hour unfocused.
Totally. And I think the other really good thing on that point that you're saying is I say to myself, and I also say to other people, when you're not in flow, because I, as a wellness coach in the recovery space, I talk about flourishing. So I say to people, we have to look at our mental, our physical, our spiritual, our social aspects, okay? And what happens is like when you're not in flow, you're not addressing those elements. So I say to people, when you're feeling that you're sort of going off your pathway or you're not accomplishing things or exactly what's actually happening, I say to people, stop, walk away from your desk and do something physical. So whether it's like doing, standing, doing like leverage, like doing some calf muscle exercises or just doing some breathing or just stretching. Okay. I say to that, I actually do this myself. And then basically that's the physical aspect. The social aspect is actually, well, I'm not in flow with my work. I need to connect with someone. Someone, a text message to someone and say, how are you going? Let's catch up for a coffee next week. Just something really simple, or even doing something really nice, as in sending a nice quote to someone to making them smile, because people need that social inclusion and wellness, right?
Yeah.
The other aspect is that spiritual side of actually, if you're not in flow, then do something like read a nice verse or, get out of the office for like a couple of minutes or just walk around into the kitchen area, make yourself a cup of tea. But when you're sitting there, give yourself a nice positive affirmation about being in flow with yourself and that sort of thing, that spiritual side. So they're little tips that I practice about every hour and a half, 2 hours, if I'm not feeling like I'm in flow, that's what I do, so they work, trust
Wow,
me.
I need to level up because I'm only doing that in the morning at the moment.
Yeah, well, the consistency is the key,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, and
And
I
I think,
find whenever I'm not doing that stuff, I have really, really bad days.
yeah, well, I think you might just be thinking about what I've just said to you then. And so I think probably some of you, people that are watching as well. The other thing I also say to people is seek out positive environments, okay? Growth thrives in an environment where there are conducive surroundings. And when I say that, I talk about not just being around your circle of influence or positive people, but actually be in, a conducive environment where it's actually in flow. So where the environment's nice, and we talk about feng shui, we talk about energy and that positive and negative. And I always say to people, we've got winter coming up here now, right, in Perth, okay, in the southern region. So I say to people, we talk about the winter blues, don't we? All right. And what happens is we see that big shift. So I say to people, put something positive in your room, because if you're in an office, sometimes it's very, dark, there's nothing very attractive about it. There's nothing uplifting. Put a nice pot plant there. Even when you dress, if you work in the city, typical attire is like suits, grey, black.
100%.
All that sort of stuff, pinstripe, you know what I mean? Like when I go into the city and I've got suits on, I'm actually wearing stuff that's bright and colourful. Today I'm sort of wearing something black and white with the flower and stuff, but I would wear a scarf just to lift it, and it actually lifts people, and that's one of the things I think is important as well. I think, the other thing about growing and changing and overcoming the obstacles wherever you are in life is also becoming strategic about who you're going to connect with and why you're going to connect with them, and to maximize your growth through developing positive strategies. So if you can identify, we talk about strengths, okay, and people say weaknesses, and I don't like the word weakness. I call it unrealized strengths, all right? And what it is, and as you probably know, being, in the personal training, in the gym sector, that sort of space, is an unrealized strength is just like a muscle that hasn't been exercised, okay? We're not comfortable with, that skill, or we need to learn more about it. So what I encourage people to do is say, well, if you can identify an unrealized strength, get curious as to how you can actually engage, okay? And develop a strategy to overcome it. Now, a lot of people say to me, oh my goodness, how can you get on the radio and go and talk in community in a couple of hundred, in front of a big, massive audience? And I go, well, it's about learning what your strengths are and knowing what your unrealized strengths are and learning to build that capacity. So if you think about something, that you're not doing so well at, think about how can I accomplish that, and how can that become a strength? How can I work on that? So if you're not good at writing, for example, you're not good at, talking, you're doing public speaking, go and connect, get on meetups, go and connect with local groups. I think we've got, what have we got? We've got Toastmasters, we've got Rotary. There's all these different groups out there encourage people to get up and speak. You've got like, I think, BNI, you've got, groups for men and women. Get out there, and really exercise that muscle and build it up. So I think, the other big thing, I think, working in the mental health and suicide prevention space, and, someone with lived experience, and having experienced a lot of traumas and things like that, is about turning negatives into positives, okay? And people say, oh, and when we're in that dark space and we can't understand what's going on, the negative self-talk comes in, okay? And what I say to people is actually, how do we overcome it? So, good management of bad experiences is what it's about, okay? And people look at me and go, oh, and I go, and that leads to greater growth. So rather than going, this is horrible, look what's happened to me, and stepping into that victim and woe's me, look at it from the perspective of like, how can I manage this experience? What lessons have I learned about myself? Okay, and it's not necessarily about the other person's. What lessons can I learn about myself, and how can I utilize that to be an opportunity for growth? Okay, I think that's one of the biggest things. I can see you're sitting there smiling, going, I'm liking this.
I am.
So I think, one of the biggest things that I learned from myself is, growing. Okay, growth sort of doesn't happen because we want it to. It's all from our experiences in life. So I always say to people, grow from the inside and then outwards. Okay, because our character growth determines the height of what we are going to accomplish in our personal growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely.
Yeah. So invest in the little things. Like, what am I curious? What's my unrealized strengths that I need to build on, and get curious. There's so many resources out there. There's so many services providing free opportunities and things and training. As I grew up, I didn't have access to a lot of resources, but I actually had access to a lot of very influential and affluential people who actually became my mentors. Um, and the one thing I always say is to people, be like a rubber band. And they go, what? Stretch yourself to grow, okay? Because we know that when we stretch and if we get a rubber band and we sort of pull it, we get that traction going, and then it sort of reaches that critical point and then it'll still come back. But when we stretch ourselves to grow, um, we don't stop learning. We actually learn more, okay? And, growth stops pretty much when you lose yourself, okay? With the tension between where you are and where you could be.
That's really cool.
Makes sense? Yeah. Well, that's what I think about, and I always say, go, what are you doing? I go, you know what? I always put myself out there. I always say to people, fear, because people go, oh, no, I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. And I say to people, fear is your greatest opportunity for learning and growth. And I say, rather than pushing it away, I said, embrace it like you're dancing with it, okay? And I like salsa and I like to tango as well. And I remember doing a talk at one time, and I said, who's got a fear? And all these people put their hands up, And I said, right, who can dance? And this guy danced, put his hand up. And I grabbed him. I said, right, up the front. And he looked at me and he was like, oh. And I said, you know what? I said, I'm fear. And I said, and he had me like we were going to dance in front of like an audience. And I said, I want you to, when you lead, I said, what do you do? And he goes, well, I take control and this is what I do and blah, 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 blah. And I take the woman or I'm directing. I said, well, I'm fear. And I said, I want you to do the same thing. And you could see him processing it, as well as a lot of people that were actually watching and they were listening. So take fear and dance with it and lead it, okay, and embrace it, okay? Because when we hold fear, we're in control.
That's one of the best quotes I've heard in a long time.
Well, it's true. You have to practice it. Like I said, like that muscle. Get in there and practice.
I've got a couple questions, buddy, like on
Yeah,
your
sure.
story. I think you said at about 12 years old, you realized like what was going on for you.
Yeah.
Looking back now, obviously it's going to be hard to remember, but do you remember how you felt about yourself and your place in the world at that point?
It's an interesting question that you ask me that, because I have got a really good memory going back to that time frame.
Okay.
And I remember, realizing that my experiences had made me unique. Okay. And even back then, even through the experiences that I've had, it was about embracing that and recognizing that it was okay to be different. It was okay to learn from those experiences. And even though some of them were horrific and they weren't positive, it made me realize that I've got the power to do something with this. I can either accept it and be a victim and continue this pathway, or I can actually break the cycle and move away. And that's what I chose to do. And I remember so vividly, I think I was down at Fremantle at Tandy's and I was with one of my other uncles and I saw my stepfather there. And I walked up to him and said, I remember what you've done to me. And I actually articulated it. Yeah. And the people in the shop were like, what? And I said, and you know what? I said, I will never allow anyone to touch me or, in particular you, come into my personal space again and take away my power. And my uncle was standing with me, just looked at me, and my stepfather actually left the shop so quickly because I said to him, I know this is what you did to me. And I explained it and I owned it, So stepping into that is quite a powerful thing to recognize and validate yourself.
Yeah, well, you did step into it. I mean, you very much stepped into your power, especially, I think you said the first time you told anyone was like with a group of friends. How does someone that young, like, were you brought up with that sort of mindset to step into the power to realize that you weren't different? and to be
Look,
okay with it?
look, I think, as I sort of said to you, that reality of actually articulating it to others, um, there is a lot of shame that encapsulates all these feelings, and shame is like a cattle brand. Okay, as soon as you say something, we have self shame. Okay, we have family shame. So family carries shame with whatever you articulate. We also have community shame. This is societal. There's also professional shame as well about, how they see themselves with the work that they're doing and the things they're exposed, or if an experience occurs, say, for someone's taking their life as an example of what they could have done better. So it's really interesting question that you ask that. But I think, it's validating that experience and moving forward and saying, how can I utilize this? Because my family disowned me because I spoke up. Okay. And when you're a teenager, or not even a teenager, just as an individual, when you have that sense of clarity and understanding of the experience and acknowledging your truth, how do you move forward? How do you actually validate that? And I think it's really important for people to realize that is to do it is to be in a safe place with people, to share with people that can be trusted. And, I remember at that time saying, if you tell anyone, I'll just deny it, because
Wow.
that was the truth that I had been told through my experiences, that no one would believe me. No one would acknowledge my experiences, and that I was a bad child, and I'd be unloved and all this sort of stuff. And that's what I'm saying. So at 12, it started to open up. And then I was like, right, I want to make the individual accountable, but now I'm actually going to articulate this as a whole to community. And that's what really sort of made me go,
Wow,
and really accept it.
that's powerful for someone that young.
It is. And, I remember seeing a psychiatrist, and he said to me, Kat, he said, at 15, he said, what was it? He said, most people would sort of live in sufferance or just continue that pattern. And I was told that, oh, Kat, you should be a lesbian. You should be, and it was, and that was the age and the language that they said back then.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you should be a lesbian and a man hater. You should be a drug and alcohol person, addicted to drugs and alcohol, and, all this, so many shoulds. But it was like, no, I don't need to do that. I just want people to understand and listen and feel validated and heard. And I think that's the biggest thing. I don't need to be what other people think I should be
Yeah.
or could be, and I think that's the thing, is recognize and validating the I am and taking that power back.
How did
Yeah.
how did you go about that? Because most people never get to that point where they accept themselves for who they are and live for
Yeah.
themselves rather than validation from others.
I think the real issue around that is actually, like I said to you earlier, taking that time to build on your own capacities, okay? Getting curious, asking the whys. You know what? Sometimes, when we look at, in governance processes in the medical model or in industry out there, or, we do things because it's a crisis management situation. And this is what's happened with the mining industry, okay? As you know, the report's just come out. And I read through that in depthly the other day and went, it came out as a result of things occurring and it reaching an exponential point of crisis, okay? We don't have to reach that point of crisis, and we shouldn't. And one of the biggest things I see is, with the medical model, is that, we get told to go to the doctor when we're sick, okay?
Yeah.
That is just so wrong as far as I'm concerned from a health and well-being perspective. We should be going to the doctor and talking about our well-being and having those conversations. I can see in my family history there could be, you know, diabetes. I can see my family history that there's heart conditions. I can see my family history there's rheumatoid arthritis, or there's mental health issues, or there's alcohol and other drugs, or there's mental health. Whatever it is, it's about the preventative approach and intervention before it happens.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to actually look at their whole health and well-being holistically and saying, well, am I sleeping well? What's going on with my sleeping? Am I exercising? How's my nutrition going? You know, it's not waiting for the wheels to fall off to see the doctor or a specialist when it's too late. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we need to teach our children. We need to teach community, and we also need to empower people living with chronic illness or mental health or suicide ideation or whatever's going on, the preventative processes rather than leaving it later. And I think it's also important for people to realise that the medical approach around medications is only there to serve one portion. And I think the belief systems of where we are and relying on you must take medicines because this is going to fix it is not right. It's only one small part of it. And I see it around people with mental health issues and suicide ideation or schizophrenia and stuff. We are not teaching people to learn to have positive coping mechanisms. We're teaching people that a pill's going to fix it. You're going to live with this for the rest of your life. So suck it up. No,
Yeah.
we're not giving people positive coping mechanism tools to actually realise that we can function outside of that belief system.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so you touched on the fact that you were homeless. Like, how old were you when that happened? And like looking back now, how did that impact you? Because I spoke to someone who did, I think it was 30 days homeless just as like a test to raise funds for charity. And he said by week 3, people weren't even looking at him anymore, and he felt like he was alone and like that he didn't exist.
It was interesting because, you know, I was quite lucky because of the traumas that my mum had experienced and hadn't owned. She didn't really know how to parent because she'd been institutionalised, okay? And in that sort of environment, and we think about it when we talk about people in forensic issues and in jails, you get told when to brush your teeth, when to have breakfast, when to have a shower, when you got to go to sleep. You know, it's all structured. And it's the same thing that we see at schools. If you aligned schools with prison, you'll see the same elements. And I mean, you're laughing, but it's true.
Oh no,
You know what I
I know
mean?
with the
It's so
bells and stuff.
structured. Yeah. It's true. And we don't encourage people to be free thinkers because that's a no-no. And you're stepping outside that square, you know, and we've got to have people, you know, the square plug round hole scenario. You've got to fit the mold of what we want people to conform to in society. And if you don't, then you get told you're different. So when it came to me, sort of like my mum saying, you've got to get out of the house and, you know, and I could just see all these things going on and the dynamics of it. I remember reaching out to one of my boyfriends, his mum, and she was a beautiful Scottish lady. And I had a really, really lovely relationship with her and her 2 daughters. And she could see my mum because she worked in the carer space, and she could see my mum was struggling. And, you know, the kids at school didn't know I was doing year 11 and 12. I wasn't at home. I was actually staying with them, you know. And it got to the point where it's like, if I didn't go to them, I was going to be out in the street.
Okay.
And, you know, but not having any money, not having any supports because I had been disowned because I had shared the truth
Yeah.
about my experiences and not being validated. And it was quite crushing because it isolated me. It isolated me from family. It isolated me from friends, and not being able to share and be open and honest about exactly what was going on. And I think that's the biggest thing, you know. And I remember because of the experiences of what had happened, I remember being 8 years of age and catching a bus and going into Fremantle, living in Hamilton Hill in Southwell, and going and paying the electricity bill at such a young age and having to do the shopping. Back then I would get like, you know, $70 or whatever it was, which was a lot of money back then in the, you know, the early 80s. And, you know, and late 70s, and catching the bus to the, you know, the local shopping centre and catching a taxi home and having the shopping list. So I grew up pretty young with no childhood at all. And it was pure survival. You know, we talk about the fright, flight and the freeze scenario.
Yeah.
It was like, I'm a fighter.
Wow. That's no wonder you were so independent and so
Mm.
comfortable within yourself.
Yeah, and you know, like I said to you, the psychiatrist always said to me, like, what was it that made you realise that you had to get out of that environment? And I said, because it wasn't functional. I would not survive, and I couldn't heal. I wouldn't have never been able to heal. And that's the biggest thing. Like, you know, stay in that and know the pathway is that way, or go that way and have an opportunity to at least have some sort of level of control and grow. And I chose that pathway. So, yeah.
I think you touched on being in a psych ward as well and speaking to someone and really connecting with them. Had you been able to share your story and really connect with someone up until that point?
Well, I'd shared a lot of my stuff with my auntie, and it was really quite sad because, you know, she got it. Okay. When I shared this is what had happened to me, she validated it and said, he did the same thing to me, and he did this to his own siblings as well. And it really crushed me. And I actually had to take a step back and go, wow. And I encouraged her. This is my auntie who was 7 years older than me. She was more like a sister. I said, well, let's do some healing together. I said, we can break this cycle. We can make the change. But it was too confronting for her. It was too scary. And she looked at me, and I was doing this and doing these workshops and, you know, doing rebirthing and regression and all this sort of stuff. And she said, Kat, I'm so proud of you. She said that you're doing it for us. And she said, I can't do it. I'm not ready, you know, and it broke my heart, but I got it. And, you know, and sort of, you know, as a teenager, I was 19, sitting in the psych ward talking to this girl who, you know, was same age as me, just lost her boyfriend. And, you know, we got it because we were peers. And there was no shame, there was no judgment. It was just pure acceptance of the journey that we both were on, but also that understanding. And I remember, you know, I was at a private clinic in Perth, and just sitting there and just listening to people, and the conversations that other patients actually had around, you know, being fearful of another person's mental health diagnosis. And I became friends with a really beautiful man that was in there, and he was experiencing delusions. He was suffering with schizophrenia and hearing voices, and he was talking. Okay, he was, you know, he was elevated, and I remember seeing him, and I went over to him and I said, I love those slippers. And he had those, you know, those bear slippers with the big toenails and
Yeah.
stuff. And I couldn't help it. And I went over because he was being isolated from people that were there with a similar mental health diagnosis or whatever was going on. And they were being judgmental.
Yeah.
And so I unpacked it and I went over and I had a chat with him. I built rapport with him and I said, you know what you're missing on those? I said, it's some nail polish on the toenails. And he lost it laughing. He lost it laughing, and it brought him down, and we connected and we were friends since then, you know, and we had this amazing conversation. But it was really interesting, you know, being in that space because of where I was at about being authentic with my own journey. I actually shared stuff and people saw that vulnerability about my journey and the experiences, and I could read people. And I out in the community can be at a shopping centre and see someone sitting there crying, very distressed, or just this really their whole physiology just not being on cue. And I remember having a conversation with someone about it, and they were like, wow, I've never had someone did this apart from when my mother died. And they were like, this is amazing. And we had this conversation. And so I think, you know, having that conversations out in community, but also when I was in the private clinic, people were disclosing things to me that they had never disclosed to their psychs, never disclosed to their partners, their husband or their wives or their family members at all. And it was a real gift and an honour for them to actually share. I felt really privileged and humbled to actually be present with those people, to allow that vulnerability, but acceptance of that journey. And that is the biggest thing when you're working in this space and we talk about recovery. So, yeah, so I have
That's
shared
powerful.
and I
No
have
wonder you're
listened.
doing what you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. And I see it as a real gift, that's for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the last things I want to ask about your story is talking about this bunny ears quotes cult that, that you were working for this magazine and it was part of this cult, but you talking about how progressive and forward thinking they were. How were you at that time able to be open-minded enough to go into a group like this? Because most people would want to fit in like in a normal social setting so bad that they don't ever attempt that.
Well, it's interesting. I think because of my experiences and my willingness to want to grow and learn, and that real question of why,
Yeah.
um, it was about the people and listening to their experiences and their insight, but also listening to where, in my own heart space of where I was. And I think, that whole social movement was too progressive, and they were innovators. I mean, he wasn't innovative with the work that they were doing, and people felt threatened by it because they were like, oh, you're a cult. And that's what happens. People call you a weirdo, people call you crazy, people call you a cult, because some of the elements of what you're actually offering are too progressive for community. And so they feel challenged and threatened by that model. But, when I sort of sat there, I listened to people and the growth and the insights that they learned from connecting with others. I mean, I remember sitting there, we'd come and start the day at like 8:30 in the morning, and it was bizarre. It was all new learnings to me. And we'd all sit in a circle and we'd all hold hands and we'd do like a mindfulness meditation together. And you could really feel that shift in the vibrations of who we were and how we started the day. So yeah, it was it was amazing. And just don't get me wrong, some of the things were a bit more out of where I needed to be. Like, some would say, well, that's a real extremity. But you know what? For people that were ready to step up into that space and to experience it, that was okay. But for me, I just sort of took one step at a time and learned to stretch myself and learn to grow and like realize what was going on and ask questions. You know,
Yeah.
people used to go batty, and when I've had my own staff working for me or wherever I was like, you know what? Curiosity is not about killing the cat. Pardon the pun. It's about like learning and growing and challenging the norm, you know, and
Exactly.
and that's what it's about. So yeah, you know, I was very grateful for those experiences and the opportunity to connect with so many amazing and beautiful people. Like, if I wasn't there at that group, I wouldn't have met Stuart Wilde. And it's interesting because, and Deepak Chopra and Sondra Ray, and I've got all these books and everything signed by them and everything. And I did the workshops. And at the time it was confronting, but it was the best learning I ever gained out of it. So, yeah,
That's
it was
amazing.
good. Yeah, it was good.
Okay, I think getting on to like your tools, you
hmm
spoke about meditation and your juice in the morning. How do
hmm
you practice meditation yourself, or how do you implement it? And what is in your juice?
Okay. So basically, in my juice, we'll start with the juice thing first. So I always have spinach or kale.
Yeah,
I put coconut water in there. I use a paleo mix as well that you can get from the shops. I put some of that in there. And depending on what I want to do and depending on what's going on, like to keep the alkalinity going, I might put some berries. So I put some raspberries or blueberries. Um, yeah, so it just depends what's happening. I might put a banana in there. So I've got, two juices. One's like a berry one with the raspberries and blueberries, and the other day will be like the banana and the coconut. So it just depends. I could use almond milk some days, and other days I'll just use coconut water. And when I do my mindfulness and my meditation, um, I basically sit in my office at home, and then I just really center myself, because one thing that I did do a long time ago, and this is the thing around like the Bhagwan and the Orange people, meditation and mindfulness was one of their biggest things that they did. And so I always sort of, invite myself to be at peace and be at calm in my heart space and really to feel my heart beating.
wow.
And sometimes I'll actually project myself as well, where one of my favourite shows used to be called The Monkey. Do you remember Monkey?
No.
All right. Well, it was an ABC Channel 2, like, it was round with the goodies and stuff. And, like, it's reflecting my age. And um, there was a little Buddhist monk in it, and he used to meditate and project himself on a mountain sitting amongst the clouds. And that's what I do.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, and I think one of the biggest things, I learned to skydive when I was younger, and I can really, when I do that, I can actually feel the clouds of being around me and going flowing past my face. So yeah, And, but I listen to a lot of binaural beats as well.
Awesome.
And, practicing as a theta healer as well. It's quite important to sort of, be grounded and just let things go. So, yeah,
It's
it's
amazing.
nice. Yeah.
I want to be respectful of your time. I've got a couple quick questions, then we'll wrap up, buddy.
Yeah, sure.
Knowing everything that you've been through, the abuse, the violence, and the homelessness, the attempts, knowing all that you've used, the reflection, the morning routine, being in flow, positive environments, positive strategies, good management of bad experiences, and learning to dance with that fear, what would you say the quality of your life is like now?
Wow. The quality of my life is awesome.
Yes.
The many gifts that present to me, um, I don't go searching for things. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
And that's when you're in flow, and I mean truly in flow, the capacity to flourish is amazing. And if anyone's sort of like, and I've got books all over the place. Look, I'm in the studio and I've got this book I actually lent to someone. I've just picked it up. Look, see, Flourish. I'm like a walking library for people. We'll go, here, read this book, read that book. I think, the biggest thing I would say is basically focusing on enlarging your potential and your capacity. Okay. Because I think when we do that, we actually grow so much more. Like my life now, when I look back, I went through, horrific family court matters. There was still that whole family domestic violence experience going on through financial and psychological and emotional abuse still. But learning to understand, to have boundaries, learning to understand what opportunities are available if we really truly open not just our eyes, but also our hearts. So, yeah, so I
It's
think that
amazing.
is one of the biggest things. When we really in flow, we're connecting our heart, our head, and our stomach. And that's like the chakras and stuff, because, being a Reiki master as well, it's all about energy. um, you know, Having positive mentors out there. If people out there inspire you, reach out, and, if they say no, that's not the sort of person you want to work with. And I say to people, the door closing is not an opportunity for no, it's an opportunity for yes, for you to seek an opportunity elsewhere and to be really true to yourself. So, yeah, so just being in flow in your heart space and, you know, when we grow in that space, it enables other people to grow as well. And that's when that massive flow comes in. And you don't realise the impact. I chair at the Suicide Prevention Network, and the impact I've had on people, just being a voice and an advocate around positive mental well-being, suicide prevention and positive mental health and advocating has just been such an amazing gift for me. Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
it makes me sing, like my whole vibration. I get goosebumps just like
I love it.
talking about it. And people have said to me, how can we bottle up your energy and put it in a glass jar and sell it? They said, vibration is just so high. And I was like, because I just let things go. We can only control ourselves and accept our journey for ourselves and no one else.
Do you
So,
feel like
yeah.
you have I don't know how to say this. Do you feel like you can remain in flow and follow that path? Because well, to me, it seems like you're very much aligned and you're very authentic.
Yeah, yeah. Look, the thing is that you can tell people when they're in flow, okay? You can pick it. I don't go out of my way to impress people. I don't go out of my way to, this is what I'm doing. I put things on my social media because I think it's important and it's relevant. Okay. People connect with me because I am authentic. I am genuine. But I'm also respectful of helping empowering other people. And I think, being in flow, you reach this point as an individual, okay, where it all just comes together like an implosion of your gifts, okay. And that's what it is. It's coming to that full acceptance of realization of who you are and being grateful for your experiences. Now, people have said to me, oh, well, like I said to you before, you should be a man hater, you should be angry, hate the world, this, that, the other. You know what? The biggest thing that I did was actually reading the books by the Dalai Lama. I've read Kabbalah. I've done so much stuff, meditations at Buddhist retreats, 1 month of no speaking. If anyone wants to try that, I suggest that you go and do that. Seriously, you will learn about yourself, you get that sense of clarity and calmness and peaceness, and I go out to Serpentine every now and then as well to see the Buddhist monks and things. It's beautiful out there. You can have lunch with them. And you do the meditation. But the point about being in flow is that, yes, I am in flow consistently because I'm true to my core values and I'm true to my morals. And when you own that, you can accomplish anything. And that's what it's really about. Yeah.
That's profound. That is so cool.
But it's true. Yeah. And I hope that, the people that are listening and to our conversation today take something away that, resonates with them, or something, a tool that they can use. And I'm always available to have a chat with people as well.
You're amazing.
So, yeah, well, we're all human beings, and we're social creatures, and we're all here to learn from each other. And that's what the gifts of life is about.
Cool. What are you most grateful for right now? Second to last.
What am I most grateful for?
Yeah.
For being alive.
Yes.
For being alive. And, my title is Lifestyle, and it's life is in capitals, okay? Because, the way I see it through my journey and my experiences in life is that living is for everyone. And that's what it's about. And, we all have the capacity and the power to actually change a person's day by even one small, simple thing. And I always say to people, smiling doesn't cost us anything, but it's the most powerfulest gift that you can give someone. Connecting with someone, looking in their eyes and smiling, you can see a person's physiology change, not just their face, but their whole physical appearance as well, and the energy shift. So, yeah, being alive, I'm so grateful that I'm alive today to share my story with people and help people, inspire people, and empower people to own who they are and recognise that there is no shame. It's about who we are, and it's amazing. There's so many beautiful people out there. It's just, and sometimes they don't recognise that, and it just takes one person to connect with someone to make that shift, and that's all it requires. So,
You're
yeah.
amazing.
Oh, thank you. You know what? People say that to me when I hear people go, oh, I want to introduce Kat, and I'll speak at a public event, and they say all this stuff. But you know what? I say, I'm me. I'm just simple me, and I need to validate my accomplishments, but that's not who makes me who I am, and I think it's just being authentic and sitting in that heart space and really encouraging people to own their story and who they are, and to step into their power and have that voice. And that's what it's about. Yeah.
Well, I think I've got a crush. Last question. If you had the chance to put a message on a billboard where thousands of people would see it every day, buddy, what would that message be?
I reckon it would be living is for everyone, love life and rock it.
Yes. Oh, man. You're gold.
Oh, thank you.
I can understand why you have your own show now.
Yeah. Like I said, it all just came, opportunities presented, and things sort of happened. So, and I'm grateful that you reached out and connected with me as well, because we're all here. We've all got important work to do as individuals. And working together and collaborating, we can make such a difference in people's lives, and that's what it's about.
Absolutely.
So thank you for inviting me to come on your podcast.
Okay.
I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. I would just want to acknowledge you before you wrap up for not only making time to do this, battling with me being such a noob with Skype, giving up your time to do it, and most importantly, turning your pain into power, using your story to help others find their voice and step into their power. It's an important topic, and it's an important message that you have. So I'm grateful there's someone like you, especially in Perth, with a message like this, and hopefully nationally soon.
Yeah, well, I'm working on it. I mean, I've been invited, to Queensland. I spoke at the Wesley Suicide National Prevention Conference. I've been speaking here, there, and everywhere, and I've just sort of just being in flow, and just not wanting to just go out there, and go, here I am, everybody, because that's not what I'm about. Some people make a deliberate thing, and some people like go, I want to be a Tony Robbins, or I want to be a, you know what? You don't need to be a Tony Robbins, or you don't need to be a whoever, or, you just need to be you. And
Exactly.
that's what it is. You just need to be yourself. And that's where that power comes from, and the passion and having that purpose in life. So, yeah. So, like I said, thank you for having me on today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and we'll have to catch up face to face for a coffee
Yes,
or
please.
or a juice. Okay.
Thank you so much, buddy. You have a good day, eh?
That's okay. Love, light, and blessings to you all. Take care.
Bye, Kat.
Cheers. Bye.